Hey guys, V. Rigoni, Max, high performance real estate entrepreneur. And let's be talking about, that's right, let's be talking about what's going on in the real estate market today. And how is that sizing up compared to some of the other stuff you're hearing on the internet regarding today's market. Real simple, all right? And as we go through this video, you're gonna learn some real good. Let's subscribe to the channel, all right? Smash the like button, leave some comments. I don't care if you don't like what I'm saying. I find that interesting too. But if you do like it and you want to ask some questions, make sure you ask some questions because we'll respond to those questions. And also, if it's an interesting enough question, I realize I'm not trying to make a judgment around your questions, but if it's a question that other people might be interested in too, well then we'll make a show about it. Is that fair? Is that a plan? So let's get to it. Now, so what do I always say? Let's start this out by, hey, think big, start now, and grow fast. I don't care what we're talking about. Now today, we're talking about the economy. We're talking about how is this economy affecting what's going on in real estate today. You still got you got two camps out there, basically. You got the one camp that says, buy now, buy now, buy now. Excuse me, I thought real estate was based upon location, location, location. It's not about buy now. Buy at the right time. Now, am I talking about timing the market? No, I'm just talking about the real estate cycle. And this is not the cycle for someone to start buying real estate that has never bought real estate before. You will get eaten alive because there are things that are happening out there that we have not seen since the 1980s. So I'm old enough to know what the 80s are like. And everything that I see going on right now, every comparison is that they're comparing this market. All the gurus out there, they're comparing this market to the 1990s and 2008. And they're talking about, and everything I'm seeing out there is that they're comparing this market primarily to 2007, 2008, when the stock market actually broke in 2008, but the real estate market broke in 2007. And remember, there were like at least 3 years of hardcore pain in the real estate market because it was a liquidity issue. In other words, there was no money to buy real estate. So it just dropped like a freaking vacuum. It just went through the floor because of all of what took place. Now, everything you're hearing is that, it's really like 2008 this way, or it's like no, it's not like 2008, people. Not in residential. There will be some similarities to commercial, and we'll explain why. But this is primarily like the 1980s. And I've said this before, and let me reiterate. Since I started doing these what do we call
videos?
These? Since I started doing these videos a year and a half ago, more than a year and a half ago, I've been telling you that the Fed is raising interest rates in order to crush inflation, right? That's a given. Am I unique in that? No. But there's a difference between the 1980s and now. And that is the last time the Fed started raising interest rates was the 1980s to crush inflation of the 1970s. And that created a downturn in the real estate industry, mostly in transactions, just like is happening today. I think real estate transactions are down somewhere between 40 and 50 on the residential, in the 70s on the multifamily. That's right, in the 70s. But again, 40 to 50, percent less transactions. No matter where you're at, even though it's local. We always say real estate's local. But there are some macroeconomic conditions that do affect everywhere, every community. And this is one of those times. All right, now, that doesn't mean that everybody's losing value at the same rate. That doesn't mean all the transactions are down at the same rate everywhere. No, just from a macro basis, we all know that real estate transactions are down. Just ask the real estate agent in your family that's giving up their license because they haven't made a buck in a year. And they don't want to pay the expenses of being in the real estate business, so they're giving it up. We saw that in the 80s. We saw the mass exodus. Ask the surveyors, ask the loan companies, ask the title companies. We did a video on this before, but this is the reason I'm updating it is because I keep hearing this bullshit. This is similar to 2008. It's not. 2008 was a liquidity crisis. The banks had no money to lend, none. That's not what the problem is today. Look at your mail. You're still getting all the credit card applications you possibly could get. You weren't getting those back in 2008. They all dried up. Commercial loans, okay, are drying up. Loan to values. When you go to buy an apartment building today, they're looking to not give you more than 50 to 55% loan to value. That's down from 70 and 80 in some respects, and some were even higher. Now, on the residential side, why is it very similar to the 1980s? Because you have all these people now that have fixed rate mortgages. Unlike 2008, where it was all adjustable rate mortgages. These fixed rate mortgages or houses that are paid off, they say the average, if you take all the houses paid off and all the interest rates on mortgages, it's under 4% for the average person owning a home. They don't have the same problem they had in 2008, where the payment was skyrocketing because of the fact that interest rates had skyrocketed on them. And they didn't have to skyrocket too much, right? If you had one of those ninja loans that you got at 0.5% or 1%, and then the LIBOR index doubled, just went from 1.5 to 2, 2.5, 3, your payment doubled. There were people at the end of 2008 that didn't even make their first payment. Not their last payment, their first. Because they couldn't afford, the interest rate went up that quickly. So, and when I say to you that this is 1980s again, is because you got the same thing happen then. When the Federal Reserve came in and raised those interest rates, people, yes, they had high interest rate mortgages compared to today. They were 9%, but the houses weren't as valued as high, but they went to 16.5, and that just shut down new buyers. It shut them down faster and quicker than today because people didn't have the money they have today. They didn't have access to debt that they have today. Today they can access their 401k for down payment. Today they can access their IRAs for down payment. Today they can access their parents. I heard something like a statistic like 30% of people are getting money from their parents to buy a house. That didn't happen in the 80s, guys. So there's all this much more liquidity today for people to get into a home. That's why the home sales, there's still been a demand and why prices haven't fallen that greatly. Back in the 80s, you didn't have that as much, but prices still didn't fall that much. They from about the beginning of that recession, from the beginning of them raising interest rates. Remember, when they first start raising interest rates, it doesn't immediately start a recession. Right? Recessions usually start when they get done raising interest rates, because then the full impact of that hits the economy and there's a lag. So first they start raising interest. They shut down the real estate business pretty much primarily in the 1980s. Same kind of thing happened here. But because there were nobody was looking to buy, but nobody was really looking to sell, prices didn't get crushed. Not like what happened in 2008 when you ran out of money and people wanted to buy, but they had no money. Liquidity, then that crushed people. And then you had the higher interest rate payments because of the adjustable rate mortgages. Back in the 1980s, there were no adjustable rate mortgages in the beginning of the 80s. They were all fixed rate. So as long as you knew going in that you could afford that 9% interest rate in 1980 and you could afford it, you were good. The only people that got hurt is if they lost their job. Remember, and in a recession, when that eventually happened, yes, there were some homes that went into foreclosure, all right? But basically, the reality is that yes, I think unemployment went up to 10 or 11%, but at that time we used to consider unemployment, full employment, at 6% unemployed. Used to be so even though unemployment went up, some people did lose. They lost their homes. I get it, but they didn't lose homes like they did in 2008 when the payment doubled and tripled on them. So keep in mind what took place in the 1980s is very similar to what's taking place right now, because this is not a liquidity crisis. This is an rising interest rate environment due to the Federal Reserve trying to break inflation. And so transactions are down, just like transactions were down in the 1980s. But the prices haven't fallen all that much. In fact, right now they've stayed even probably firmer than they did in the early 80s. Why? Because, like I said, people have more access to money. And so people who've really wanted to buy homes have been buying them. Now, where's the problem going to lie here? Well, here's what it is. Last week, interest rates hit 8%. They said it was something like a 30-year high. 8%. 2 years ago, it was 2.5%. And now it's 8. So we will get to the point where I believe we'll get some softness in the price of homes. Yes, there will be some softness. The problem we have with getting too much softness, the reason prices are not going to fall that much, is because there's a housing shortage in this country. Remember, corporations, your BlackRocks, your Blackstones, all these kinds of people, these corporations, all right, they've bought up like 25% of all the single-family homes in America. And they did that in 2008. You see, when you couldn't go out and buy a house because you had no liquidity, even though the opportunity was there because the banks weren't lending you any money in 2009 and in 2010, they didn't want to lend you the money, the big corporations were sucking up these homes because they generate liquidity in a different way. All right? And so they were buying up to 25%. So there's really a shortage, not just because of them, but because of the lack of construction on single-family homes. A lot of these construction companies, they've been building multifamily. And so with the increase in the population and the decrease in available housing, prices are going to stay firmer. Will they drop 5, 10, 15%? Probably in the worst moments. But the moment the economy starts to rebound, right, and that's going to be out 8 months to a year, because remember, the economy doesn't actually go into the recession typically, if you go back and look, until they're done raising interest rates because of the lag it takes for the high interest rates to start to affect the economy. And so we're now looking at probably another year on this real estate situation. Even when they stop raising interest rates, that doesn't mean they're going to run out and start cutting them. And even if they cut them next year by two or three times, let's say by the end of the year next year, in the third, fourth quarter, they've cut interest rates a couple. So they've cut the interest rates by 0.5% or 0.75%. They cut them a lot. They move interest rates down a lot slower than they move them up. Let me say that again. They move interest rates down a lot slower than they move them up, and we saw that. In the mid-1980s when they finally, or early 1980s when they finally got interest rates at the very highest point, they didn't bottom out until 2001. I'm sorry, until 2001. It took all those years. 9/11, okay, was probably the effects that took place. Remember, when 9/11 hit, we were already in a recession. They were already cutting interest rates. But then when 9/11 happened, all right, then they brought interest rates basically down to basically zero on the Fed fund rate. So it took years, it took decades to get the rates all the way to the bottom into the basement. All right. Now I'm not saying they may not cut rates a couple times next year. They may, but what's the difference? What does 0.5%? What does 0.75% do to the economy? And they've got this robust economy that they're trying to wrangle down, but they can't seem to do it. So my point again is, it took years for real estate to really, once they broke the inflation, once the Federal Reserve in the 1980s accomplished what they wanted, and they actually went too far, they really broke the economy. Now let's hope they don't do that this time, because if they really break the economy, it will take some time for real estate to be an appreciation play again. It will start to become a cash flow play again as the rates come down. But it took a decade to go by before, into the mid-1990s, before real estate started to become an appreciation play again, where you just bought it and it went up in value more than 1 or 2 or 3%. Now, there's still great opportunities when that happens, because really all you need is a stable economy. I don't care what the interest rates are. Everything will adjust to the interest rates. I've spent a lot of my time investing in real estate when rates were at 6, 7, 9%, and there was money to be made. Now, was it easy money? Was it did you have the kind of arbitrage between, on a 30 or 2.5% rate to no inflation? No, it was tighter. Cash flows were tighter, but they were still there. Appreciation came over time. You could still apply forced appreciation to fix up properties and bring up the rents to a higher level, to bring the building all those things exist. But understand, it will take some time. If this is much more like the 1980s than it was like in 2008. Because remember, in 2008, what did they just have to do? They just had to put money back into the economy, and the interest rates were so low that it just stimulated everything. Right? They're doing the opposite now. They're raising interest rates. They're taking money out of the economy. They don't want real estate on fire. Now, there's some other macro things that are a problem for the Fed, right? Because real estate isn't as big of our economy as it was in the 1980s. You have other sectors that have gotten much bigger. Healthcare has gotten much bigger, and it's very difficult for interest rates to affect healthcare. Education, the same thing. I teach retirement classes in some of the universities around Chicago, and let me tell you, on a Saturday, they have group after group after group of kids walking those universities. They're so excited to go there and spend $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to come out with a history degree or an art degree. I don't get it. The parents look so proud. The kid, they're all, and it's like, are you people real? I digress. Go down that rabbit hole. But in any case, remember, all right, there's a time to buy. This is not the time to buy. All right, especially if you're starting out. Now, does that mean that you don't do anything? No. There are other opportunities in this world right now. Buying businesses. We've been buying restaurants, successful restaurants. There are other things you could be doing, other entrepreneurial things you can be doing right now that can make up for the fact that the real estate industry is in the doldrums. So, you know what I'm saying? Why do you want to push against a rubber band? All right? It's ridiculous. You're not going to get anywhere. All right? Start to look at what is the other opportunities. And as we go forward, we're going to talk about some of these other opportunities. We are basically a real estate business, but there's a time to buy real estate. There's a time to force appreciation on a real estate. There's a time to increase the rents on real estate. All these things, very important. And then there's just some time where you just got to sit and wait, okay, and learn and get information and get ready to go. That's what I can tell you. But if you're out there listening to these guys that either are telling you that the residential market's going to crash, they're wrong. If they're telling you this is the time to buy, they're wrong. All right? Now, the caveat is always there, right? I always say, there's always someone that's, it might be a family member trying to dump a piece of property, death, divorce, bankruptcy. There can always be something available. They're at 30 or 40% down, but you're going to have to dig to find that. If you find it, no one's saying not to buy something that's down 40%. That's a bargain. I'm talking about just going out there, doing your basic amount of research, buying a house, and this isn't the time to do it. There will be a time, and that will be coming, and we'll let you know when that is. But right now, not so good. So that's basically talking about on that topic. Now, let's talk about the Airbnb business. All these people that went out and they paid too much money for an Airbnb. And what I mean by an Airbnb, right? We know that's the name of the company that you go through in order to promote your property. And I'm talking about short-term rental, right? All right, so you go out, you buy that property, right? You overpay for that property. Or you do one of those get-rich schemes that they were telling you about, was to go out and lease that property and then get a clause in the rent that allowed you to run it as an Airbnb. Now, first of all, it's hard for me to even fathom that an owner of a property would let you do it, but I guess it's been done. And there's a model around that. But if you overpaid for that property, or you overpaid on the rent for that property, on the lease value of that property, so you could Airbnb it. Because let's face it, what's going to make a seller let you go and short-term rental his property? And I use Airbnb like someone says the word Kleenex. Right? We know it's a tissue. We know the brand is Kleenex, but in the vernacular, Kleenex has become the name of a tissue. It's just tissue, right? So if you go out there and you buy that short-term rental, or you're gonna lease that short-term rental from somebody else, and then you're going to turn it into a short-term rental, why do you think that landlord let you do that? Because most likely you paid a whole lot more for that lease than what you could go out and rent it for on a month-to-month basis. And so, or you paid too much for the building because you didn't care, because it was in the hot area, and you overpaid for the property because you thought, well, I can just turn this around and I can flip this out for thousands of dollars a week, and I have no problem paying those rents, paying that mortgage. Right. Well, what's happening now? Well, you've got to be careful about some of this stuff. Now, Look at New York, New York City. They just banned, just completely banned short-term rentals. And they'll charge you like a $5,000 a day fine if they catch you. Well, good luck with that, guys. Do you think that's creating some problems for those people who own those properties, that paid up for those properties, that signed leases with landlords at higher than market rents, so they could turn around and they could short-term rental it? You think they're in trouble? You're darn right. They're getting there. Now, in the beginning, yes, they got some reserves, they can do it. But what do you do in New York? You're screwed. They just made it illegal. Remember, be careful of some of this stuff. Now, do we own some Airbnbs? So I should say some short-term rentals? Yes. But they're on a commercial property in which they're sitting on a lake, and they're in a situation in which, which people want to be there. There's a limited supply of lakefront short-term rentals in the area in which I live. And so they get rented at a premium. But if we're just talking about, an apartment in some city somewhere, and you're using it as an alternative to a hotel, well, these cities are cracking down on this stuff. They're getting too much pressure from the commercial communities, these hotel companies, and all this kind of stuff, the people that donate big to campaigns. So be careful. Make sure that if you are buying a property that you're going to use for short-term rental, you understand what the zoning, what the environment is in that community. Make sure that you're grandfathered in, so if they change the rules, you're not stuck there with a property that you pay too much for. And again, don't overpay for a property just because it can be used as a short-term rental. Because if that is taken away from you, either through legislation, ordinance, all right, or based upon the macro economy, then you're in trouble. You will go from like, what's going on? You'll be scrambling. You'll start to put your income into it to make the mortgage payments. And if you haven't built up enough reserves, what do you think's going to end up happening to some of these people? Now, does it happen to the person that has one or two? No. They usually can cover that with their mortgage, with their income, all right, or whatever, other revenues. It's some of them went out there and listened to some of these gurus and went out and bought 20 of them, 30 of them, and now they're absolutely screwed. So that's really the bottom line. Does this faltering of the short-term rental in this business, is it going to affect real estate in general? No, it's not big enough. It's going to leave some really bad stains on the sidewalk. That's the problem. So if you're looking at doing short-term rentals, understand what the underlying market is for your typical monthly lease, your yearly lease. Understand what that market value is. And if you're going to buy a property, make sure that if the short-term rental aspect of the reason you're buying it, if it falters for any reason, I don't care, macroeconomics, like I said, zoning, legislation, whatever, then make sure that you can turn around and lease that property and cover that mortgage payment. Real important. That's really should be the basic principle. Same thing is if you lease an apartment or a house from a landlord, be careful of overpaying above market rent. What I mean by above market rent is what will it rent for on a monthly basis. If you are careful with that, all right, you can always then sublet it into a longer term lease and just get on with your life. All right? Now, if you went that route of leasing properties at a higher rent than the market rent, you're going to have a different problem. It's going to be much more difficult in some respects for you to get out of. You better start going and talking to that landlord. You better say that you have some really frank conversations. Because he knows or she knows that you're going to be up against the wall and you're not going to be able to pay the rent. And all they're going to end up doing is getting the property back. So have that conversation with them now. They may lower that rent to a more market rent and then you can go sublet it. Or they may just take the property back and so right away. Maybe you give up you may end up having to give up your security deposit or whatever, or write a check for some amount of money. But what you don't want to get into is something where you're sitting there and you're trying to ignore the problem, and then months go by and the guy hasn't gotten his rent, and now you've got a different problem. Don't let that happen. Be proactive. So, Just be careful out there, and be careful of the get rich quick schemes. Whether they're in real estate, they're in Bitcoin, I don't care what it is. Be careful. You have to put in the time, you have to put in the work, you have to think. Remember, it's think and grow rich. But in the beginning, you also have to work. And you may work harder in the beginning than you've ever worked before. But once that it pays off in ways in which the average person can never understand. Okay? They can't comprehend. So let's get out there, guys. What do I always say? Besides, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. All right? All right? Think big. Start now. Grow fast. Think big. Start now. Grow fast. Talk to you soon. Let's get out there. Let's make it happen.